What if communicating with impact doesn't begin with what you're about to say, but with whether you're connected to yourself? Hello, and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for leaders and people curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. I'm your host, Susan Ní Chríodáin, and I help people in leadership make sense of themselves and their work life, especially in times of uncertainty, transition, and difficulty. I'm also the author of the award-winning book, Leading Beyond the Numbers. And I love real conversations, the ones that invite you to truly listen, that create space for reflection, to be heard, and to feel understood. Together with leaders and fellow explorers, we shine a light on what shapes our work lives, both from the outside and the inside. Join us for stories, insights, and perspectives that keep humanity at the heart of work. Well, today I am so happy to have Caroline Harvey here with me on Life Beyond the Numbers. Caroline, you're so welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. And I don't know about you, not just you, Caroline, but you, the listener, but at work, I think one of the things that many of us often get told or get presented with is we could communicate better. And communication is such a huge catch-all term. And often I think people might not know where to start. So, Caroline, in the most basic way, what is to communicate better? What's it all about?
Oh my goodness. So that is, as you say, a very broad question to start with. It reminds me of when you've been told to be more confident. You just need to be more confident. But where do you start? And it's not necessarily as simple as it sounds. Communicate better. Communication is all about connection, right? And getting your message across to your audience. And to do that effectively, you have to first connect with yourself. Because if you're not connected to who you are and to what's important to you, whatever it is that you want to convey, then how are you going to get your audience excited about it?
Interesting. Even an audience of one, because often it might be just a one-on-one meeting, let's just say at work, or because like you said, communications, it's such a big, vast topic. So how do, like, are there different forms of communication that are do I always need to connect with myself, maybe? See, I'm having difficulty communicating here now.
Well, the other thing that I think it's important to remember is that it's a conversation. Even when you're making a presentation, it's a conversation. It's two-way. It should never just be a monologue or this is what I want to say. Let me just dump it on whoever's listening. And so whether it's one-to-one, obviously it's much more of a conversation scenario, or if you're standing in front of a group presenting or speaking, there's still that two-way connection. We're listening to our audience. We're aware of our audience. We're looking at our audience so that we're picking up signs of how what we're saying is landing, and we might need to adjust. We might need to wake them up, change the energy in the room. So, yeah.
And is that why it terrifies people? Because I think it is safe to say that, like, the standing up in front of a room certainly terrifies a lot of people, but also perhaps the ability to get your message across. If you don't know what that message is, how to connect to yourself, and so much more.
Well, yes. I mean, it's starting to sound very complicated, but
Yeah.
I think it's because most of us have never been taught how to communicate. And I remember this from doing workshops with groups. Everyone would go up and make their presentation, and I would facilitate feedback and give feedback. And so many times the presentations were very technical and the slides were full and the speaker didn't necessarily have their message very clear. So we'd give feedback to help them. But it was always like afterwards, I remember somebody saying that the strange thing is that when we see a presentation like that, we know that it's not very interesting, and then we go and do exactly the same thing ourselves. That's the thing. We haven't been taught. So in my experience, we go through the motions. We do what we think we have to do to get the job done with our slide deck and going through the slides, sometimes hiding behind those slides until we go on to the next presentation. And I think a large part of the problem is that there's little to no feedback to say that there is another way, there is a much better way, which means starting with your audience, then your objective, working out what the message is given your audience and your objective, and then you build what you want to say around that. So the message is your cornerstone, but it's not necessarily easy. Okay, so what is my message? It's a whole process of trying to work out what is it I want my audience to take away from this presentation, or if I want to move them to a certain action, what do I need to say to inspire them to action? So I mean, it's all like nuts and bolts of communication, but most people who stand up and give a speech or make a presentation have not gone through those nuts and bolts.
And even
Yes.
going into a team meeting, I mean, I think it's the same thing. It's like if you've got a group of people in front of you and you're the leader,
Yeah.
then the onus is on you to get your message across. So, preparation, Caroline. It sounds like preparation is key here.
Preparation is definitely key because the process about asking yourself those questions before you stand up and speak is essential. You can't always prepare because if you're in a meeting and you're asked to give an update, you might not be able to have prepared for that particular contribution, but you can nonetheless be prepared just simply because you are confident that you have the answer. And if you don't have the complete answer, then you will find it out. But I think we get so stressed as well about this impromptu speaking and, yes, speaking up at meetings. As you know, I work a lot with women, helping them to speak up with clarity and confidence, but also to convey the value and the impact of their work so they can get to where they want to be in their careers. And one of the several barriers that women face in communicating as they would like to is this personal barrier of fear of speaking up or not contributing at the meeting because, oof, my idea might not be valid. So there's a lot of holding back as well, which, I mean, of course, it depends on personality type as well. But I think the whole confidence issue is a big one because public speaking is one of those things we do that triggers our primal fear response. Yeah.
It is, and I've seen it often, and I suppose there is a step before that. I think the not underestimating the power of the practice or the preparation of what is it I'm trying to get across. Because I think that's the other thing is often we know what we want to say. We just don't know how to say it in a way that others understand it.
Right, which is why it's important to take a step back from what we want to say to how do I need to say this in order for my audience to hear it? I mean, really hear it, to get it and to act on it if necessary. Practice is essential, and not just practicing by doing the presentation and getting through it, but rehearsing it once you've prepared it, asking for feedback from colleagues or friends, or depending on what it is you're practicing. But I mean, feedback is really important. I take part every September in a communications course at an international business school in Barcelona. All the incoming international MBA students are put through their paces for several days in various speech. They make a whole series of speeches, and in small teams, they're coached, and I'm one of the coaches, to give them feedback and to guide them in making better speeches. And it's a brilliant preparation for starting a 2-year MBA. But it also shows the importance of preparation, practice, and feedback. That's exactly what the course is based on. They get a lot of practice and a lot of feedback. And then that stands them in good stead moving forward to be communicating much more confidently and effectively as they go through their MBA. So that's just as valid in the corporate, in the business world, or wherever we need to communicate.
And then back to the connecting within or being yourself, because I know that's something that you talk about as well, Caroline. And many people, like, I suppose the thing is, if I'm not myself, then who am I? And it's about this persona, I suppose, isn't it, that we've created in our professional lives.
I remember working back in the corporate world when I was living in Paris, and I was definitely not myself. I was corporate me. I dressed what I thought was a corporate way of dressing, and I had my briefcase, and I thought, well, I was very professional, but I also wasn't me, and I realized that I was definitely in a role at that time. And I'm not suggesting that everybody who works in the corporate world is in a role, although, of course, we are in a certain role. But I think oftentimes we do hide behind that persona. We have a professional facade, which makes us feel safe and secure. And maybe we feel that it's not appropriate or that it's just safer if we stay within that certain persona. It's something to hide behind. I think often we grab for something to hide behind, like the slides when we're making a presentation.
Or our technical expertise, I think, is
Right.
another one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and certainly for your work, you know that leading beyond the numbers, it means going beyond the data and the content so that we are taking into account the people, not just performance and profit and productivity. So it's exactly that. Who are we? Who am I as a person? Not just as a professional. So that's when I said at the beginning about connecting to who we are, because it just makes for much more colourful communication.
A colourful communication. And I'm also reminded of the Maya Angelou quote that people might not remember what you said or what, I can't remember the
What
second
you,
part.
yeah,
Yeah. And then, but they remember how you made them feel. And
exactly.
if I am relaxed into who I am speaking in that way, then people are going to respond to that.
Yeah, and also that quote, which I love, it speaks to the fact that it's not just about appealing to people on a logical or rational level, it's also about appealing to the emotions, because that's when people really sit up and listen. And it's by being able to move people, not just convince them with our credibility and the facts and figures that we place before them, but it's also about showing up as a person, as a human, but also appealing, knowing that that's what the connection that we're building is with other people. I mean, the audience is made up of people, and we want those people to feel something. Otherwise, if they don't feel anything, they're not going to be moved to action. And generally, if we're taking the time and trouble to stand up in front of a group of people, then it's for a purpose. That's the other thing that's so much underestimated, I think, is the time that we're in meetings or that we're making presentations. That time is valuable, it's worth something. So if we're not going to make the best use of it possible by really planning what we want to say and how we can do it in the most effective ways to move our audience from one point to another to where we would like them to be to make the decision, for example, that we need them to make, or to get the approval that we need from them. And I think talking about the emotions, that's why I think storytelling is one of the most effective ways of getting our message across. But again, if you say storytelling, if we think story, that we think back to our childhood and oh, well, I mean, I haven't really told stories since I was a kid, or listened to stories since I was a kid, which means that we've lost the habit of finding and telling stories. So I work a lot on storytelling as well, whether it's helping my clients to find their stories and then shape them and helping them integrate those stories into their communication.
And like that's lovely because you're helping people find their stories, the stories that will help bring their work to life in a
That's it.
way that they can communicate their message with others. And it's not just the corporate world. I mean, I think it's lots of workplaces where you almost think that your own experiences of life aren't relevant to
Yeah.
your work. So are people surprised, Caroline?
Oh, yeah. And I love helping people. It's like taking the blinkers off, or a veil is lifted when they suddenly realize, oh, yeah, it's true that I can bring that story into my work. I had a client who, when we worked together, because she was really suffering from imposter syndrome. She's brilliant, totally qualified for her role, but wasn't entirely convinced that she was. And in the work that we did, she rediscovered her passion for story. She's an excellent storyteller. And I remember her telling me a story. It was simply about her passion for cooking and a recipe that she absolutely loved. And she shared the recipe, why it was meaningful to her. And it made me want to cook it. And I did. I tried it out. It was delicious. And I always ask, how do you think you could use that in your communication? And of course, an easy way, or it's like a shortcut to story, is through metaphor or analogy, that you can talk about a recipe or ingredients. And as she has a genuine love for them, then it's something that she can use to illustrate any number of things that are business related when you're talking about cooking and working together and bringing together ingredients and all the things associated with that. So I think using your passions as analogies or ways into a more personal approach to business communications, it's an easy way in, because they say metaphor is the shortest form of story. So,
And it is. And I love that, marrying your own passion for something with what you're trying to get across, because it's also unique. No one else can tell that story that way except you. And there's something very powerful about that.
absolutely. It comes back to the idea of voice and essence. And I went through the same thing, thinking, oh, then that story's not valid. The fact that I grew up in Wales is an integral part of me. And I always say that, Wales, as you know, is known as the land of song. And growing up in the land of song made me appreciate the power of voice and the power of words, because it was just something that was so present. I really think that that has shaped who I am. The fact that knowing the power of voice and that we get to choose the words that we use, it's a huge thing that we completely underestimate. And what you said about everybody's voice is unique, in the same way that our fingerprints are unique. We've got into a habit of being on a bit of a production line with our communications, where we've forgotten that at the root of our communications, it's who we are as a person. And whether it's our stories, talking about our achievements and presenting them as stories and bringing in anecdotes, all of that is what brings our communication to life. And it just makes it so much more engaging and easier for the audience to follow, or not just to follow us, but to stay there from start to finish and act on what it is that we want them to do or take away.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking about the word polished, because I think a lot of us go for that. We could call it performance or polished or perfect. There's this ideal way we think we're supposed to communicate professionally. Polished or not, Caroline? And polished in the sense of perfection, polished.
Oof, I knew, I had a feeling that other P word was going to come up. Polish, perfection, performance. Well, having been on that very journey myself, as an introvert, I had to really overcome my own stage fright. I was one of those people that I thought, getting up on stage was just, I turned into a complete rabbit in the headlights. But I knew that I had ideas to share. And so the route I took was to do theatre and improv and clown, so I could get up on stage and appreciate that actually it's a liberating thing as well. I realised that I have things to share. I have things, especially in clown, because obviously theatre is different because you're in a role. But clowning is really about coming back to who you are, the child in you. So that was a bit of a catalyst. So we've talked about this before. Performance, whether you feel that you're in a role, you're hiding behind a facade, or however you cope with stage fright, can be a first stepping stone to then finding your real voice. And I wouldn't knock that, because I think that we all have to find our own way. And the important thing is that there comes a point where I realize that I'm speaking up as myself. And so when I'm working with clients, that's exactly what we work on. So a lot of peeling back the layers and listening and reflecting back and helping people to connect or reconnect with their stories and their values and their beliefs, things that are important to them, so that they can really see who they are. I think the other thing is that we've often lost sight of our own brilliance, whether it's our brilliance, we call it voice brilliance or essence. We often lose sight of that as we go through life and get more responsible.
I suppose we take it for granted almost as well, and we don't value it because no one has along the way. No one says to you, "You're amazing, that's fantastic, I believe in you." They do and they don't. The performance part gets more praise, another P word, than actually you delivering a message. Because sometimes when you get your message across, people just take that for granted. They don't realize the work that went into communicating. And I think especially when you're trying to simplify something, to make something sound simple isn't easy.
No, it's not. And I work a lot with women in STEM, as you know, and helping them to move from complexity to simplicity, because they work with a lot of complexity. But if they want people to get that and to understand the value of their work, oftentimes it means simplifying and really moving to a simple message and using story and analogy. So yeah, and simplifying, less is more, so that we're really bringing things down to saying as much as is needed to be said rather than saying everything.
And I think that's so true in normal day-to-day interactions as well. You know, we've all probably been stuck at someone's desk where they just go on and on and on and on and on forever. They like the sound of their own voice, or they don't know how to stop talking. And that's not about over communicating. That's about communicating stuff that's not relevant. There's a discernment that's required as well, Caroline, I guess. How do you know if no one tells you
How do you know? How do you know
that
what?
you're saying too much?
So I love that word discernment. Well, I think being attentive to your audience and it's, yes, it's not the monologue, it's the exchange, it's the two-way conversation. I don't want to bring everything back to the extrovert introvert thing, but I know that for introverts it does tend to happen a lot that we, being an introvert myself, hold back and let other people speak for us. But that's doing ourselves a disservice, because that's when we're not sharing our achievements, our ideas, and not making the contribution that we can. So I think the onus is on us to know that we have to use our voice, because it's all very well so people saying, "Oh, that was great," but we have to know as well that it is great. We have to understand and really recognize the value of who we are, not just our work, but of who we are. I listened to your episode with Julia Smith.
Yeah, Julie. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. About confidence.
Yeah, about confidence. And I loved her definition of confidence is trusting ourselves and our capabilities. I totally agree. And I always like to look at it that our competence or our capabilities are at a certain level. And as long as our confidence is lagging behind, then we're not our best selves and we're not operating at our full potential. And so for me, it's about once your confidence is at the same level as your competence and your capabilities, then that's it. Confidence is about having a true measure of just how we are. Because then, as I think Julie said, that's when we know that whatever happens, we'll be able to deal with it. And so going into a meeting and knowing that even if you're called upon and you're not prepared to give a report or a status update or whatever, you'll be able to do it.
End of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like that impact gap almost, isn't it? That if your competence level and your confidence level, if there's a gap between them, then the impact you have is undermined.
Right, that's it. It's diluted. And also, when we talk about impactful communication, we have a tendency, women in general, but I'm sure it's not only women who use diminishing language, when we tend to put these disclaimers and hedging words or phrases. The number of times that I've heard somebody come out with a statement of some kind and then say, does that make sense? And it meant total sense. It could not have been clearer. But we feel that we have to do that little just in case it wasn't quite as clear or perfect as it might have been. And that's what I work on as well. It's just one of the many barriers that can exist to really communicating as we can.
And I think it's almost apologetic. We're almost apologizing sometimes for having an opinion. And that's part of our conditioning too. But I think the thing I've noticed as we're speaking, and its communication goes far beyond the words as well, doesn't it, Caroline? So even you talked earlier about, I don't know, you said something, you went, ooh, 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 ooh. And like all of that is communication. I know I don't show the video, but I'm using my hands a lot. And that's how I communicate. My hands are very much part of the communication. And I'm not sure we're always aware when we are disconnected from ourselves of how we come across, that we're always communicating something.
Absolutely. And sometimes we can get some interesting surprises when we do come. For example, if you record yourself, so I always say to my clients, record yourself. Well, I record them for one thing, but when you're practicing, record yourself. So not just listening to what you're saying, but you can see as well how you move in the space, how you use your body language, as you said, your hands, and whether you smile or not. Because that's another thing, we can suddenly become very serious when we're communicating a high stake present in a presentation, for example. And yet our non-verbal language speaks volumes, and it really has to be taken into account. But sometimes we can be unaware of the diminishing language, as I said, that slightly apologetic, downplaying words that we use. We might not be aware of filler words, of the pace that we speak at, actually speaking really fast. And that's another thing about, because I work mainly with English as a second language speakers who are already crossing the language barrier, because most of them in a global setting will be speaking in English a lot of the time. And native English speakers often don't take that into account and speak at normal speed. So I'm always at pains to point out that we need to adjust for that, because it's the language barrier, the cultural barrier that a lot of people are having to cross in a global business world.
I guess it's back again to a point you made right early on, is knowing your audience. And it's not about you. And I think it often, because we feel pressure to communicate well, we make the whole thing about ourselves. And you made the point very early on, start with your audience. What's the message that you want to get across? And it's having then the presence of mind as well as the presence to respond to what you're getting. Because the other thing is, if everyone looks bored, how do you respond to that? But then maybe they're actually sitting back enjoying. We can't always respond to what we see in front of us either, because we may be misinterpreting what we see.
Well, yeah, and there's a big group. People have different responses and reactions. But I think that the idea is that we need to be as engaging as possible, and we need to vary, whether it's our voice or the data. If we mix things up and we ask questions, and if people are looking a little jaded when it's the after lunch shift, for example, then we need to get them up. And so it is about having the confidence to know that you'll know what to do, whatever the situation.
What I was thinking as well is, we've been talking a lot about speaking, and I know we've talked about PowerPoint and presentations and nonverbal, but it's also about written communication. Writing is a huge form of communication in workplaces. I mean, email after email, report after report. And that's something people struggle with too, I think.
And that's where as I said in the beginning, the nuts and bolts of communication come in very handy, because it's exactly the same process. It's know your audience, what's the objective of your email, for example, or your report, and what's the key message. And once you have the answer to those three things, that guides you as to what you need to write. And, again, the less is more approach. I think it was on this morning on LinkedIn, my good friend Steve Hetherington had put the quote from Michelangelo about starting with a block of marble and releasing the angel within by sculpting away the marble that's around the form that he ultimately wants. And I always think of communications like that as well. It's taking away what we don't need. And it might be very good marble, but we're always very reluctant to take away because, oh yeah, but it's part of my work, and yeah, but it's interesting. But I've worked really hard to get that result. But we need to do that if we're to release the angel within.
I went to see an exhibition here in Oxford last Christmas, and it was called Killing Your Darlings. And that's what it was about. It was like famous, well-known, long dead authors and their scribblings and the versions of poems and whittling it down so that you just killed off what was superfluous.
Right.
And I remember that process myself writing my book. And it was so hard to take stuff away. And that's where feedback comes in great as well, because someone comes back to you and says, that's a great story, but I don't think it fits. Or could you say that in fewer words? Or
Yeah.
I got lost. And I think not taking that personally is where a lot of us maybe have to do the work.
Yeah, exactly. It can be hard. People say feedback is a gift, and if it's conveyed as a gift, then yes, it is. But it can be hard, yes, to question the way that you have been doing things for a long time. But it is really important to test, when we're rehearsing and practicing, to test out what we are doing, hopefully on people who are representative of our audience. But even if they're not, you can say, look, my audience is this. How is this? How is my message landing? Is it clear? Do I need to say this? I mean, one of the most helpful things we can do is to give constructive and specific feedback. But it's true that we're not used to asking for it.
And the specificity, because right at the beginning of this episode, I said to you, how do we communicate better?
Mm.
And if somebody tells you that you need to communicate better, you need to get them to be specific because they're not communicating very well either, are they?
Exactly. Yeah, yes. It's like, yes, communicate better, but how? How? So exactly, they need to say what is it that's not working? First of all, what is the person doing well? Because I think it's always important to know and to acknowledge people's strong points, because you need to know what the foundations are that you already have, and everybody already has qualities and strengths when it comes to communication. And once people know that, then they're receptive to hearing what needs to be improved. When I'm giving feedback, I always work on those principles. You start by telling the person what you did well, and then, okay, where I think you could do even better would be here, here, here. It might be your non-verbal language. It might be slimming down the data. It might be starting off with a hook to attract attention and not just going straight in. And definitely being very clear about how you want to end your speech, because that's what people are going to be taking away. It's the memorable end. It's first impression, the beginning and the end, and making sure that your message is very clear throughout. Yeah.
Whew, there is so much. And I think because we're always communicating, like everything we do, there's communication involved. We don't think about it that much. And yet, the impact of our work demands that we think about it more. And our chance of climbing the ladder, if that's our objective, also demands that. Because I think when we look often at people that are CEOs or leaders, they're often excellent communicators. They may not have the competence to back it up, but they're often excellent communicators. So it seems like such a fundamental skill for anyone to work on.
We're all communicators, whatever our line of business, we're all communicators. And good leaders are good communicators, definitely. And so, as you say, for climbing the ladder, for getting where you want to be in your career, communications, soft skills, as they call it, it's vital that we really work on those if we're not already using our communication in the most effective way, especially in a world of AI, because it's our communication capacities and our humanity and the way that we do show up as people that is what makes us different from the smart machines that are increasingly encroaching into our world, whether it's communications or not. So we need to be able to stand out as who we are.
Oh, so much. And that our experience matters, I think,
Yeah.
as well. And that was one thing I remember listening to a podcast episode when I was trying to write my book and when I was procrastinating about how to get started and all of that kind of stuff. And I heard somebody say, if you use your own experiences, no one can argue with that. And it was such a great jumping off point because for a lot of stuff, even though I might not have included it in the end, it at least helped me to think. And I think it goes to what you talked about, the storytelling and the impact that communication seems to me, what I'm taking away from this is never underestimate you and what you have to bring to something. And the more of you and your experiences you use, that you tailor them, then you're probably going to go further with your communication.
It all comes back to presence, and I love Amy Cuddy, the way Amy Cuddy talks about presence, because she wrote a whole book on presence. It's not just the TED talk with the power poses. And she said such, I mean, really compelling things about presence. Like presence stems from believing and trusting your story, which is exactly what you were just saying about if it comes from your experience, then nobody can argue with it. And it's what puts the color and the flavor into what you're saying. It's unique. So
And it's a connection. It's how you connect. And that's what communication is all about. Caroline, if someone would like to know more and connect with you, how can they communicate with you?
oh, very easily. So on LinkedIn, if you look up Caroline Harvey Barcelona, which is where I'm based, then you'll easily find me. Otherwise, I have a website, which is carolineharvey.me.
Brilliant. That's so simple.
Very simple. We like to keep it simple.
Yeah, Caroline, it's been lovely to chat to you today. And I think some really thought-provoking, what's the word? You see, the words, the words matter, don't they? And sometimes it's hard to find the words, but thought-provoking jumping off points, I'm going to say, for people to explore their impact and their communication further.
Definitely. Yes. Yeah. Communicate with impact. That's what we all need to be aiming for. Make our impact and make our mark in the world.
Amazing. Use your voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
What stayed with me from this conversation is Caroline's opening point. Communication is connection. And to connect with others, we have to first connect with ourselves. It's kind of practical, really. If I'm not connected to who I am and to what matters to me, then it's just harder for me to get my point across. And I wonder about, and I'm curious about, the places we disconnect without really noticing. When we rely more on a professional persona, for example, or hide behind our PowerPoint slides or our job title, and when we use diminishing language. So just noticing that for ourselves can help us to turn a corner. And there's courage in choosing to come back to yourself, to find and use your voice, to trust your story, to ask for feedback specific to you and how you came across, and then to keep developing that, refining it, iterating, so that you are human and clear. And I think that's probably then where possibilities open up, because when communication is a two-way exchange or the interaction is there with another, you can connect with people, and that's what it's all about. Thank you for listening to Life Beyond the Numbers. If someone popped into your mind while you were listening, maybe a friend or a colleague, send them the episode. Chances are they'll appreciate it too. And if it spoke to you, a few kind words in a review can help others like us find it too.